My name is Lesley Hollywood, for those who don't know me, and I am a mother of 3. I have a 19-year-old daughter who just graduated last year. I have a 10-year-old and I have a 6-year-old. My 10-year-old's going into 5th grade and my 6-year-old's going into 1st grade. School safety is obviously very, very important to all of us. I think whether you're a parent, grandparent, or even just a community member. I was invited back in, I think it was April, to one of Laura's presentations about Faster Colorado at a Rotary Club in Greeley, and I didn't know anything really about it, but somebody said, you got to come to this, and I almost didn't make it. In the end I did, and when I left there, I was just so blown away by the fact that this opportunity exists here in Colorado and that more people don't know about it, and especially parents, community members, teachers, school admin. And one thing I really emphasized in this meeting today, this presentation today, is that even if you don't think you agree with this idea, with this concept, it was really important to me that people would still come out and hear what Laura has to say, because this is going to start, it's already gained so much momentum just since I learned about it in April, and it's going to continue to do so. So even if you disagree with the concept, to me it's really important that people are informed, is that they understand what it is that we're talking about before we say, I don't like that idea. If you have questions at all, please hold them until the end. We will have a whole Q&A session at the very end. And at the very, very end, before we leave, for anybody who's interested in kind of picking this up and taking the ball rolling in their school districts, their school communities, get with me. We'll have kind of an opportunity to put your name down on a sign-up sheet, and we will be able to get people connected to, kind of go from there and figure out what's the next step. I know we have people in this room from kind of all over northern Colorado, and that's fantastic. What we're talking about with Faster Colorado is it's school districts that have to approve this, or charter schools or private schools kind of work separately in other cases. And Laura will talk about that a little bit further. So I guess I'll go ahead and introduce Laura Carno. She is the director of Faster Colorado, and you've been working on this for how long?
Last couple of years. Yeah, fairly full time.
Okay, yeah, I mean, she's all over the state. You live down in Colorado Springs, if I remember correctly. She's just all over the state, just out here about just getting this information out to people so that they can learn more about it. It's a great opportunity for even just to educate ourselves. So I'll go ahead and introduce Laura right now, and then she's going to introduce Evan Todd, who's here as well. And stage is yours.
Okay, thank you. And this decided not to come back up, so if you have any magical things, I'll just start talking.
Okay.
So thanks everyone for being here on a Saturday. It's I know you have other things to do, but it is nice and cool here in the library. So as Lesley said, my name is Laura Carno, and I'm the executive director of Faster Colorado. Whoa, apparently that started working.
Let's see what's happening here.
Okay, so just ignore that and just I'll talk to you. So back in 2000, what year are we in? 18. Back in 2016, some friends in Ohio invited me out to see a Faster training class. And I've always thought that an armed good guy can always stop an armed bad guy. I like that idea. I process in my head, not in my heart. I've always liked that idea. Thank you, that's perfect. But I went to this class in Ohio, and I came back a completely changed person. My beliefs were the same. I still thought that armed good guys, even in a school, can help save lives. But what changed me when I went to Ohio is I met those people. I met the teachers, the janitors, the bus drivers, these people who would die to protect our kids. They would put their bodies between bullets and children. And they're looking for a chance to not die, save kids, and go home to their own families. One of the people who is frequently with us when we speak is this guy on the screen, Quinn Cunningham. He's one of our instructors. I'm going to talk in a minute about our instructors. 3 of the 4 actually have their own training companies. 2 have training classes today, and 1 is at a wedding. in the other side of the state and couldn't be here. I didn't want you not to have any piece of our trainers at all because they're such amazing human beings. They all started training school staffers right after Sandy Hook. They all have kids in schools. This is very important to them. So I just want to show you this. It's just a quick 3-minute video, and then I'll run through what is happening in Colorado with armed school staff, and then we'll hand it over to Evan, and then we'll go to Q&A. So let me start this real quick, because we've figured it out, right, Lesley?
Yeah, you should be able to
The thing I remember most was the crime scene and seeing the student's blood and her hair on the ground. And I will never, ever forget that. We're sitting in the office, and one of the individuals from investigations came down and started yelling, "We've got an active shooter." So I grabbed all my equipment, ran out the door, jumped into a car. We went to the school. As we entered the school, it was a very eerie feeling. There was silence. Normally when we train with a lot of chaos, distraction, fire alarms going off, and kids screaming and running at you and clinging at you, and silence, almost deafening silence where it was distracting. When we went to evacuate the children, there was a look of lost innocence, and I never want to see that. Law enforcement has a response time, and even with a school resource officer in the school, when I responded, one child lost their life. If you look at a rural area, law enforcement could be 45 minutes away. And even with an officer in the school, we lost one, and that's way too many. I decided to get involved with training armed school staff, especially through FASTER, from law enforcement. In my law enforcement career on calls for service, I've never forgotten a child victim, and I don't want to see any more child victims. FASTER is a training program for armed school staff. We do firearms training, we do mindset training, we do casualty care training, things like that. We need people who are going to train, and they're going to take this very serious because this is a very big responsibility. Not everybody can do that, and I'm cool with that. Not everybody should do that, but those who have the ability, who have the mindset to do that, when they stand up against that evil will notice. And people will stop attacking our children, because an armed society is a polite society. And when our school teachers, when our staff stand up and say, we are not going to take this anymore, we are not going to allow our children to lose their innocence in a place where they are there to learn, that's going to be a dynamic change in this country.
Now I've completely lost my ability to pull up the PowerPoint, sorry.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm not the technical one here apparently with this hookup. And I'm just looking to get to that one right there.
This one here.
Yeah, but I can't find my cursor. Okay, so it's not as good as having one of the instructors here, but I didn't want you not to have a little bit of the heart of why our instructors do this. They're all active duty law enforcement, and they absolutely have a heart for this.
Is this where we should be?
That's probably fine. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so FASTER, the training program, it actually stands for something. It stands for Faculty, Administrator, Safety Training, and Emergency Response. It's also a really easy word for folks to remember, because the faster we stop the killer, the faster we stop the bleeding, the fewer people die. And it's part of an overall safety plan, armed staff is. We would never say, arm your staff and don't lock doors. We would never say arm staff and stop doing threat assessments. This is all of the above. Somebody asked earlier about hardening the target. Absolutely. We don't want unauthorized people getting into our schools and being a danger to our kids. We've also got safe to tell and text to tell out there in schools. And you look at some of the things that are in place that have stopped school violence events, like in Douglas County a couple of years ago. And you look at those same things that when they weren't followed through on, you get Parkland and the terrible tragedy that happened in Parkland because they dropped the ball at every step. And schools are really paying great attention to that. It's also part of a lot of schools' day that they have a school resource officer in their school, and this would be a member of the local police department or a member of the local sheriff's office. It's a uniformed, armed cop at your kid's school, and that's great. I'll talk in a second about why we advocate for armed staff even when there is a school resource officer. So here's where we are today. So in Colorado, the ability to authorize armed staff has been part of the law for 15 years. And almost nobody knows about it. When I came back from faster training in Ohio, I didn't know it was lawful. I thought that there was going to have to be some sort of a law change, and there just wasn't. It has been lawful. It requires authorization by the school board or the charter school board. So if there is a charter school in a district that isn't interested in the policy, the charter school can do that on their own. There are insurance requirements. As you might imagine, anything, if you have a football team versus not having a football team, your insurance company wants to know that because there's danger of injury. Same thing with armed staff. There is an insurance company in Colorado that insures about 90% of the school districts in Colorado. And not that it's a non-event to them, because obviously this is a serious policy proposal, but it's literally a brochure for them. If a school calls them and says, hey, we're considering arming staff, what does that mean to our insurance policy? They hand them a brochure. And I've got copies of this if anybody was interested in taking that home. But it has training requirements that the insurance company says you have to do. And it's not just initial training requirements, it's ongoing training requirements. They do charge them extra. I think it's something like $600 per armed staff member, something like that. The early adopters of armed staff have always been rural schools. And it makes sense to most folks because in rural areas, law enforcement can be really far away. 30, 45 minutes, something like that. I was at a school in eastern El Paso County last night, and they actually did a drill, an active killer drill in their school, and they didn't tell the police it was going to go on until it did, so that they could measure what could actual response time look like. And it was 45 minutes, and that's just way too long. So that's why rural schools have always been the early adopters. I talk about, I'm sorry, camera guy, I keep moving. We talk about what happened after Sandy Hook. Even though this has been lawful in Colorado for 15 years, most of the schools that are carrying today started right after Sandy Hook. So it was very few before that, but it was a real wake-up call for everybody. How do I protect these little kids in my care? So where does armed staff fit? So we talk about the rural schools on 30 to 45 minutes. And then we do the math about the duration of mass casualty events. And these are like 3 to 5 minutes. So if we're at a school here in Longmont, and God forbid something happens, and we call 911, even if we called 911 the second we knew something was happening, which doesn't always happen, if they're here in 3 minutes or 4 minutes or 5 minutes, which is pretty decent response time, it could be over, and people could be dead or injured, and that's not what we want. So what we're hearing is from a lot of suburban school districts who are saying, hang on a second, I understood that 30 to 45 minute thing over there, but even a minute is too long. There's experts talk about averages. They keep changing all the time and based on how you measure it. But there's a common average that a lot of folks use that in these active killer events, one person is shot every 17 seconds. So if it's your kid in that library or in that cafeteria or in that hallway, how many 17-second intervals are you okay with? And that's what has gotten a lot of parents saying, hang on a second, if it's my kid, I want somebody there as quick as possible. If it's an SRO, great. If it's a cop, great. But most often it's not. The people who are dealing with it, the real first responders, are those people that are in the school already. And what do we see them doing? We see them putting their body in front of children and taking the bullets for the children. Is that okay? Is that as good as we can do? The other way we look at it is from a self-defense standpoint from that school employee. Do they have the right to protect children and live, or is their only choice to die to protect kids? So one of the recent events that we saw in Parkland, Coach Aaron Feast, he saved 3 children. He died a hero. God bless him. Should he have had the opportunity to stop the killer, still save those kids behind him, save his own life, protect the kids who were shot after they left Coach Feast, and then gone home to his family? I mean, that family lost their dad and their wife, or their husband rather. Can we do better than that? And we talked about this as all of the above strategies. There's also cost considerations. So lots of schools can afford an SRO, a school resource officer, and that's great. Many schools cannot. We're talking about tiny little rural schools, like the kinds that pull from a 60-mile radius. It's a really remote school. They're these tiny little schools. Their per pupil revenue is just simply not enough to afford a cop, part of a cop anyway. So it's just not an option for some schools, so they need to make a different decision. I mentioned schools that do have school resource officers. We still advocate, if there's an SRO, for armed staff. And why is that? In Arapahoe High School, Claire Davis lost her life. The school resource officer was on site. It took him 46 seconds to sprint at full speed to get to her to try and save her. 46 seconds. So you say, well, we lost fewer people because there was a school resource officer there. Absolutely. We lost one person instead of 10 or 20. But if you are Claire Davis's parents, you don't give a crap that there were not more kids killed. You lost your child. If that librarian had been one of the armed defenders, an armed defender, would that librarian been able to stop that and save Claire? We'll never know, but lots of parents want that choice. So who are schools authorizing? It comes out to about a 60-40 mix between administrators and teachers. And I mention this because we always talk about arming teachers. And when it comes right down to it, most aren't teachers. They're janitors, they're principals, they're coaches, they're people who are all over the school. They also have higher than average firearms experience. And because they're all volunteers, when a school decides to authorize, they look only for volunteers. Nobody is making anybody be an armed defender who doesn't want to be an armed defender. So when they say, who wants to volunteer for this, the folks that are coming to them are going to be people who have firearms experience. They're already comfortable. It's not going to be the people who say, I never want to be around a firearm, so pick me. It's never that person. So there's lots of experience even before they come to our class. So our trainers are all active duty law enforcement trainers, as I mentioned, lots of SWAT experience, responders to mass casualty events. You saw Quinn, he was a responder to a high school shooting. Graham Dunn was a day 2 responder to Aurora. These guys have seen a lot of stuff, a lot of really ugly stuff, and what they know is that they will never be there on time. They want to train ordinary citizens so that we can stop bad things from happening before they get there. And lastly, faster. And by the way, when a school authorizes, they can get their training anywhere. They don't have to come to us. I think we have the highest level training available out there. That's why I run it. I love the program. But it's a 3-day intensive course. We focus on mindset. Not everybody can do this, and that's okay. They have to have the right mindset going into that. Tactical medical training. So if it was 45 minutes in Sandy Hook before medics were cleared to enter the facility, could lives have been saved if there was training, if there were tourniquets throughout the school? Again, we'll never know, but we want that chance. So they learn a lot about tactical medical training. And then of course it's firearms and tactical. There's lots of time spent on that because they have to be accurate. They have to stop only the threat and not harm other folks. We spend a lot of time on what ifs. We hear all the what ifs, and we'll probably hear some more in the questions. What if a student gets a gun, gets the teacher's gun? What if they shoot through the bad guy and kill somebody innocent? All those things. We train all of that stuff, even though we have almost no incidents of these things happening. We still train for them. It's that important. When they finish the class, they qualify at Post +2. Post is Peace Officer Standards and Training. And what that is the the handgun proficiency test that law enforcement passes to get out of the academy. So 100% on Post is what cops have to do. We add 2 additional shots to that, and we require them still to perform at that 100%. Not everybody passes. That's okay. We want only the people who have demonstrated that very high level of competence to be the ones that we say they passed a faster class. So it's a very high level of skill. And then last is it's free or no cost to schools that can't afford it. We do hear an objection a lot. Gosh, teachers are buying their own school supplies out of their own pockets, and we know this. We know that budgets are tight. If schools can't afford this, they go through for free. So part of what I do, aside from talking to folks like you and school boards and parent groups, is I raise money. And we are developing affinity relationships with folks for every, I'll give you an example of somebody who's outed himself, 1776 roofing. Every roof they do, the program gets some money. It will probably pay for a whole class every year. So we're looking for relationships like that so that we can continue to provide this high-level training without cost to those schools that can't afford it. So with that, I went 5 minutes over, and I'm going to turn this over to Evan Todd, and we're going to switch microphones really stealthily here. Evan was the first student shot in the library at Columbine High School 19 years ago. He has an interesting story to tell, and he'll tell you all about that. He's a supporter of the FASTER program, and he's a supporter of the general policy of armed school staff. We're happy to have him attend things that we do and give his perspective because it's a really good one. So Evan Todd, and give me 1 second to do this.
Hello, good afternoon. Thanks for coming out today. There we go. That's good. Usually I do that in my green room with a bowl of M&Ms. No, I'm kidding. Kidding.
Is everyone here okay in the back?
Can you hear me?
We don't have any. Okay, just making sure.
So, as Laura said, I was a student at Columbine. I want to share my story of what happened that day and also why I support this program and continue to support this program. As Laura said, 19 years ago, I was a sophomore. I was 15 years old, and most of you are familiar with Columbine. Have heard of what happened there that day. I was in the library when we heard gunshots outside the school, and at first we didn't know exactly what was going on. We thought it was a prank or a car wreck, firecrackers. We thought it was anything but a school shooting. And we heard more gunshots, and at that moment we knew something was going on. Something was different. The two murderers that day started to make their way into the school, and they had shot a teacher outside who had run in. She ran into the library and yelled, "Everyone get down, there's kids with guns." And everyone climbed under desks and behind bookshelves, and I was the only one standing in the library behind a pillar, and I had two exits. There was one to the hallway and one to the outside of the school. And I kept looking at both, wondering which way I could run. I felt trapped and helpless. And as I looked out towards one of the doorways, I looked around the pillar and I saw one of the murderers standing there. He lowered his gun, and as he was lowering it, I tried to jump down behind a Xerox machine. And as I was jumping down, he fired, and I got hit in the lower left side of my back. And then he fired two more shots over my head, and it blew the desk and computer, the plastic, the wood, shrapnel back into my face and into my neck. They came into the library and started walking around very casually and leisurely, with no threat at all. They were not scared that they were going to be stopped. They walked around and they would walk up to my classmates, ask them a question, and then murder them execution style. They were in the library for 7.5 minutes. And for those of you that recall, the library is where the majority of the death and wounded came from. That was where the majority of it happened. They were in the library for 7.5 minutes. And at one point they even said, "Let's start knifing people." They shot out the window. Then after a while they came back around to where I was at. I had crawled under a librarian's desk into the foothole and pulled the chair up to cover myself. And one of them saw me under there and he pulled the chair out and he kneeled down and he put a gun to my head and he said, "Why shouldn't we kill you?" And I told him, "Look, I've been good to you and everyone in this school and you know it." And his facial expression changed and he lowered his gun and he turned to the other one and he said, "You can kill him if you want." And they said a few things back and forth to each other and decided to leave the library and go down to the Commons, which is our cafeteria area, and they left. And at that moment, that's when those of us that were still alive who could get out, got out. We ran out the back door. That day changed my life in many ways. There were classmates who were murdered, friends who were gone, and it's a day that I'll always remember. And that's a main driving force of why I support this program. We were in the school completely helpless, and they murdered nonstop. There were a lot of things that I learned during the investigation of Columbine, and tactics have changed greatly since Columbine. The law enforcement has done amazing things to stop and prevent and lessen the effects of these events, but it's still obviously not good enough. There's still failures in the system, and that is, there's no one there to protect them when that's happening. I met Laura not long after Parkland, and that's why I jumped on this, to support the teachers. I've gone out to a couple classes and met with these teachers that are going through this. You all know teachers. Some of you may even be teachers. The teachers that brought you up coming through school, or the teachers that teach your children now. These are the cream of the crop as it is. It's such a noble profession. And then the teachers who volunteer, raise their hand to take it even one step further and protect innocent children's lives and other other faculty's lives. It's such a noble cause, and I think it's something that every community should consider and talk to their school boards about to finally do something in the school to save kids faster. Excuse me. This commercial brought to you by Smart Water. Actually, this is Longmont water. It's not bad. The protocols with law enforcement before was to surround and wait like a hostage negotiation. We've now they have active shooter protocols where they go in, they actually confront, and it's saved many lives throughout the country. There's been incidents that haven't made the national news because they stopped these from happening. The other fact of what happened at Columbine, Sandy Hook, Parkland, and all of those three, and even other school shootings, teachers have defended their students, like Laura said, with their bodies. Dave Sanders at Columbine, the teacher who was murdered, died saving kids' lives. He was running through the hallways while the bullets were flying, ushering kids to safety when he was shot. And to me, that's unacceptable, that they are completely defenseless and left in a unilateral firefight. And to me, that has to stop. Not only in the act of when these things happen will it stop it, but I think arming school staff will also deter would-be killers and murderers, because they know they'll be face down. When we look at these in retrospect and see what kind of people they're targeting, schools and gun-free zones, because they know they're easy targets, and it's shown that there's more mass murders happen in these 92% of mass murders happen in gun-free zones. And if we show them that these are defended now, it will deter these from happening in the future. And it's a deterrent, and there's another aspect of this program that it's not the end-all be-all. To me, the way I look at it is like a cancer. There's prevention and there's treatment. Before you get cancer, there's a way to prevent it. There's methodologies and things that you can do to prevent school shootings and mass murders from happening. And those are completely separate from what this is. It's talking about respect for life and building a better society. There's a lot of things that go into preventing these from happening. The red flags that happen at every single time these mass murders happen. These murders broadcast that that they want to go kill innocent people. They broadcast it every single time. And for some reason, society, we haven't taken that serious enough to deal with it. The kid down in Parkland, he even turned himself and called the police on himself. There's been instances. Eric and Dylan at Columbine had run-ins with the police. They had a website with their plans. They made movies. That happens every time. The red flags will prevent it. There's a ton of prevention. But the fact when you get cancer, and this is a cancer in our society, you have to kill the cancer. You have to actually treat it in the moment. Prevention goes out the wayside at that point. When bullets start flying, that's when it needs to be stopped in its track. And this is the only way to do it the fastest way possible. With that, she went 5 minutes long, so I'd go 5 minutes short. So I don't want to take away from question and answers, but I do appreciate your guys' openness and time for coming out here today. So.
You and I are going to take questions.
You want the mic?
I'll stand close to you.
I'll just,
Okay. So I'm going to kind of run the question and answer segment here, because kind of depending on the question, they're going to decide who should answer it. So they've kind of got they do a nice tag team. So we'll go ahead and open it for question and answer. Who's got questions we can address? I'll go ahead and just start in the back. So go ahead, you can stand up and just speak loud so we can all hear you.
Some people might argue that the way to prevent these kind of shootings from happening in the first place is to have stricter background checks or to ban assault-style weapons. How would you respond to that?
Let me take that one.
Sure.
Okay. So the program that we're talking about isn't about gun rights or gun control. Based on where we are now, we can look at folks and say, this person got it when they shouldn't have. We can say this person got it, but if we had these extra laws, they still might have gotten it. What we've learned about these killers is we can make all of the gun control arguments in the world. If they want to kill, they'll figure out a way to kill. So what we're talking about, and I want all kinds of prevention discussions, like we talked about, this is all of the above. But when the rubber meets the road and there is a bad guy harming children, that needs to be stopped. So that's the part that we're here talking about today. But I firmly believe you look at some of these countries that have very, very strict gun control, and they're running people over with big trucks. That killers are going to find a way to kill.
Do you have anything else to add to that?
Well, I mean, yeah, no, it's pretty thorough.
Okay. Yes, sir.
Todd, thank you for mentioning the red flag bill. As you probably know, that bill failed in the Senate this past legislative session. If and when it comes back up, is this something, Lesley, that your organization is going to support?
Well, I think what we would do is take a look at it and determine at that time. One of the reasons, and of course we're here to talk about FASTER, not the red flag bill, but one of the reasons that we adamantly opposed the red flag bill in the last legislative session was that was actually written so hastily. There were so many problems with it in general, and such a serious bill needs debate, it needs good conversation, it needs to be very thorough and well thought out. It needs to make sure that we don't already have laws on the books that it's supposed to, that if they're saying this bill is going to do things we already have laws for. We shouldn't be making new laws to replace old laws that already don't work. That just creates a false sense of security. So of course it's hard to say yes or no because we'd have to take a look at what we would see at that time. So.
Do you support
And-
Senate Bill 270?
Which one's that?
That was the counterpart that came out of the Senate. And it was a really watered down version of the red flag bill. It died in the House. The same way the red flag bill died in the Senate.
That one, the biggest issue that we saw out of both of those was that they really lacked due process. And the other thing that I personally, a lot of us have really agreed on as far as those red flag bills, both the one that the House and the Senate here in Colorado, that's what I'm assuming you're referring to as the state legislative ones. One of the biggest issues that we saw out of that was that a lot of the things they were trying to say it should address and say it should do. We already have laws on the books that are supposed to do that. We have these 3-day rules, we have these different things. So it's important to us that if we're going to support something, that we're not just simply supporting a new law because it sounds good. We want to make sure that it's going to be effective and that we are not going to just create another false sense of security or do virtue signaling, which unfortunately we see a lot with a lot of gun control stuff. So, to say whether or not we would support something in the future, we'd have to cross that bridge when we get there. So.
Was it relevant to you that this was supported by district attorneys and police chiefs?
Yeah, I'm familiar with who supported it and who did not. So.
And
Yeah.
And if I can just say at a very high level, we all agree that mentally ill people should not have access to firearms, flat out. We all agree, both sides of the aisle, both sides of the issue. But we also agree, most of us, that law-abiding people have their rights. And so when Lesley talks about making sure that there is the due process, I mean, the devil's always in the details. I'm hoping we can talk more about the school safety aspect of this and not the politics of this after Evan says something.
And I just want to add, when I mention red flags, I'm talking literal red flags. I'm not a supporter of the red flag bill that was proposed, but Columbine had literal red flags where they broke crimes that were already on the book. Parkland, he he broke laws and committed crimes that were already on the books. And many times that's what happens, and these are not followed up on and prosecuted or turned in because people think it's a phase or they don't take it serious. And as a society, the laws that we have in place would have made a difference had they been implemented the way that they're on the books already. And that's why I don't support a lot of the legislation that goes on that are called so-called red flag laws. When you see those red flags, it's time to talk to local law enforcement about those individuals. And that's what I'm talking about. Schools, same thing. Kids are talking about it at schools. Talk to your kids about this. If there's kids that are talking about murdering those are serious red flags that you should have your children that open conversation to come to you so that you can go to the administration and local law enforcement, because those have shown already in many states to prevent these mass shootings from happening. And I've seen it firsthand, but it doesn't make the nightly news when these are apprehended, and a lot of these kids get help and move on with healthy, productive lives afterwards. And that's what I advocate for.
And I think, that's a really good point that you bring up, which is, for instance, the Parkland shooter is a good example of somebody who had, police have been called on this kid 37 times. The FBI had been called 3 times. The school, they couldn't even keep track of the number of times he had been reported. And it had anybody, so to say, we literally already have laws that should have stopped him from legally purchasing a firearm. And the government failed to do their job in that situation and allowed him to go on, and he was able to do what he did. Had they done their job, we wouldn't need new laws. So that's why I talk about why it's so important before we say, yeah, let's go ahead and pass this new law. Let's talk about the laws that we're already ignoring and see if those can be implemented in a better manner. So I'll go ahead, let's go to the very back just so I can keep track. So go ahead.
So I got a question about the training. They go through the first three days. What is the recertification going forward? Is there ongoing training requirements they have to hit?
Yeah, so the question is, what are the ongoing training requirements? So this 3-day FASTER class is the kickoff. And I'm guessing there's a fair amount of firearms owners in here, and you know that you don't just learn once how to use your firearm and then not practice ever. So there are ongoing practice requirements, and these are usually the insurance company says this is what it needs to look like, and it's pretty robust. Sometimes school boards even go above and beyond that and say, I'll see that insurance requirement and raise you something else. So there's ongoing practice requirements, and then there's recertification requirements. So we talked about that, the Colorado Post qualification. They need to re-qualify on that every single year, and then there are quarterly training requirements that are in there as well.
Yes, ma'am. Yes.
So I'd love to hear you guys talking about the enforcement of common sense gun laws. I think that's something that a lot of people on both sides of this conversation really talk together about, and that's really encouraging. But my question is that I know that you're a nonprofit, and I'm wondering, could you talk a little bit about your most significant funding sources? I know, Laura, you said you were an executive director, and this is kind of your wheelhouse. Who are your most significant?
Yeah, so I'll talk to you about the 2 that have outed themselves. And if anybody is going for, is the NRA supporting us? No. They have their own thing called School Shield. They're not interested in funding us. So if anybody was going to that question, I'll answer that right up front. Our 2 biggest funders, I talked to you about 1776 Roofing, who will be a big long-term funder for us because we get a donation with every single roof. Safari Club International, they have a Colorado segment. They have state chapters, I guess. We applied for a grant. Most of this is we apply for grants. We applied for a grant, and they granted us a $10,000 grant. What that means for us, it costs us $1,000 per staff member to put through. That is 10 people who are carrying today who get access to that really high level of training. So those are the 2 I'll talk about. We don't out our donors. The 10,000 was far and away the biggest by far. For the most part, these are folks who believe in the program. Some can afford to sponsor a teacher. Some give us the $5 they had left over in their budget that month, and that means a tremendous amount to us as well.
Would you guys consider being more transparent about your funding in the future? I realize that this is a controversial conversation, but that might help with like building trust. Just being transparent
No.
about where the money comes
No, we're good. Thank you. Yeah, it based on how we're set up as a nonprofit, we don't disclose our donors. Yeah.
So I'll just go ahead right next person. Yeah. Go right ahead.
So I'm wondering if you have, as part of your training, something to deal with people's internal biases based on the color of people's skin. I know that with the police departments around the country, there's a vast disparity in the number of people that get shot that are people of color compared to white people, and I feel like that the teachers' same internal prejudices would cause significant losses in terms of the people that get shot, and if someone isn't absolutely clear which person is the person that's shooting the kids.
So it is the concern that more children of color will be shot by armed teachers than children not of color? Okay. So in the decades that there have been armed staff throughout the country, and best estimates right now are there are probably 10,000 armed school staff across the country. We don't hear about it a lot because most schools are very quiet about this just from a safety standpoint. If something like that was happening, we would hear about it. When and you can speak to this, when somebody walks through a door with a firearm killing children, nobody cares what color that killer is.
Yeah.
He or she needs to be stopped.
And in that situation, it's pretty clear who that killer is in a school setting with a kid with a gun firing. It's pretty clear that it's, they're not holding a cell phone. It's night and day in that situation. And until you've been in that situation, it's hard to describe, but who the killer is. Every single one of these instances, it's very clear who's the threat. And that's easily identifiable. Race is not a factor. Color is not a factor. National origin, religion, all that goes out the window. When someone's murdering, they need to be stopped no matter what.
Yeah, the policemen have shot many people that are carrying cell phones, so maybe it's not always.
Whoops. I thought I put it on silent.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
I just want to expand on that a little bit. Law enforcement officers who practice regularly and they're proficient and they pass the post test, in a critical incident, their shooting rates go down to about 20% accuracy. And that's with them training on a regular basis. How do you defend that with teachers or others as far as accuracy? That's one part of it. The second side is that if you're an officer and you're entering into a school and you have multiple people with guns, how are you going to be able to tease out which is the staff member and which is the actual shooter? And then how do we defend when that less than 100% and less than 20% accuracy hits a child that's innocent? And now we have teachers killing some children because they're not accurate in a crisis situation.
Sure. So let's think about what is happening if, God forbid, an armed school staff member needs to take their firearm out. And remember, these are people who have jobs. They're teachers, they're janitors, they're doing whatever they're doing. We will never have a firearm come out of its concealment unless the worst is happening, unless Parkland is happening, unless Columbine is happening. So then you say, what are my choices here? Do people in stressful situations with a firearm miss? Absolutely, sometimes they do, even cops. There is nothing worse, though, nothing, than a deranged madman killing child after child after child with nobody to stop him. So before I answer the question, think about where we are. Think about those choices. This isn't we're arguing about a grade and a gun comes out. I mean, that's That's not happening, and if that happened, that person would be fired immediately. It would be like we're arguing over a grade and the teacher punched a kid. That person would be fired immediately. So let's make sure that we know exactly where we are. So if you picture a really, really bad guy coming in executing children, our choices are nobody is there to stop him. We wait however long it takes for law enforcement to get there. Even if they're in the parking lot and they hear the shots, it's at least a minute. Or somebody there who has a chance to stop them. So you asked the question about accuracy. And there's lots of different numbers of accuracy. Nobody hits 100% under stress, flat out. That's accurate. But that school staff member is already there. They are already very close to the bad guy. Most of these things are very close. When you look at how the children and the staff members get killed, it is usually very close. This isn't sniper distance. A huge percentage of these things end when somebody arrives with a firearm. The bad guy decides to end his life. So often, nobody's ever even going to fire a shot. I forgot your third question, I'm sorry.
I was just, how does law enforcement determine?
The link
Right,
up.
thank you so much. So we train in class that the link up with law enforcement is the most dangerous part of this whole thing. Our guys that are instructors in this class, they teach cops. They are cops. They are SWAT. They are the ones that go in. They do not want to accidentally harm an innocent person. They are exactly the right people to teach this. We don't telegraph all of the tactics that we teach because we don't want the bad guys to be able to camouflage as a good guy. But we teach these armed staff members that it is their job not to get shot by the cops. It is your job because they know that they could be viewed as a hostile person. Little things, seemingly little things, like the 911 call. So let's just say that I am the armed staff member, my hands are busy. I have somebody on the ground, my hands are busy. So I say to a student next to me, Alex, I need you to call 911. Tell them Mrs. Carno is the armed staff member. She's wearing a green sweater. Do not kill Mrs. Carno, we like her. We teach the 911 call. We teach having somebody else, Matt, go out to the door and meet the cops. Alex just dialed 911. Get them back here. Tell them I have a firearm. I am a good guy. The bad guy is on the floor. So there are a lot of things like that in something that seems simple like a 911 call, but we spend a lot of time on something like that.
I'm going to follow up. Just one part of that question you didn't answer was that this idea that police officers or the security resource officers at the school have like nonstop training where these potentially armed school staff members would not. Do you know what the difference is as far as the training, the consistent everyday training, or is it quarterly? What is the training of an SRO compared to what this would be?
Yeah, and so the mandatory training, we like to think that cops train on their firearms all the time, and that's not necessarily the case. They do have to have regular practice. They do have to have annual recertification on post, and we take our standards from that. Insurance companies take their standards from that, but they're like everybody else. We have so 3 of our instructors are competitive shooters. They shoot all the time. They were just in a competition the other day that they all placed in the top 10. Not all cops do that. Lots of cops just do their mandatory minimums because they like other stuff. So that really runs the gamut.
Okay, more questions. I will go over here now. Sorry.
In the training, they do scenarios, do they not? So that they're not going to run into a situation they've never been into or try not to?
Right, that's a good point. So the question is about scenarios in the training. And this is one of the things in the insurance requirements. It says such and such number of hours of these kinds of things, and one of them is non-lethal scenarios. And so what that means is that we use airsoft guns. It shoots a little plastic projectile. It's not going to maim anyone, but it hurts. You know when you've been shot with an airsoft round. But we have lots of different scenarios that the participants don't know going in. Who's the good guy? Who's the bad guy? Who are the bystanders? All of that kind of stuff. And it's how we sort of wrap up the class on day 3, using all of their skills. So when it's your turn to play the good guy, you have to stop the threat. You have to make the 911 call or cause it to be made. You need to apply medical care or cause it to be applied if your hands are busy. You have to do all of the stuff. What's interesting is we all know we're play acting, right? I mean, we know that these are non-lethal rounds. We know that we're making these things up, but we always stop and say, who has a Fitbit or a watch that has their heart rate on it? And we stop in the debriefing and we have them take a look at, what did that do to your heart rate? How do you feel? We want them to understand the things that happen to a person's body when you are under stress. And this is just a little tiny taste of it, but they have to get used to that. We have to talk through all of that stuff. So yeah, it's a good half a day on that. And the other thing that we have access to at the Flat Rock training facility that we use, which is the Adams County Sheriff's Office range, they have a simulator there too. And so we actually are able to rotate the teams through the simulator. And it's the one that you see on TV a lot with where cops train on those shoot, no shoot decision making. And everybody gets a chance to go through that and not only learn from their own time in the simulator, but when they watch everyone else go through it, they also learn from that.
Okay. Yes, right here in the middle. You.
It wasn't me last time. So what is like the number of schools that are on there that have taken this up in the last 15 years, or the percentage versus how many are proposing it? I imagine there's been a spike recently in the more school shootings that occur. Do you know any of that for Colorado?
Yeah, so I can tell you what I know based on people who have contacted me or come through our program. And that's the only information I have access to. So we have dealt in between last year, this year, including our class next week, is 25 school districts I'm working with right now.
Colorado?
In Colorado, correct. The Denver Post did an article where they said that they called all 180 districts or something like that, and they found 30 armed districts. I've seen another number, 37. It just might be who is willing to say, to reveal the information. The number of school districts I'm talking to right now who are in some sort of process, whether they're just starting to talk about it, or last night I was out in Peyton, Colorado, and they just had their second kind of big community town hall forum. The first one was 70 people, and last night's was 85. So people are in different school districts are in different places, but I'd say I'm dealing with another about dozen or so. I also kind of hear on the grapevine, like from the insurance guys, that there are others out there that just aren't talking to me, which is fine. They can get their training many other places, but those are the numbers that I know for sure.
Yes.
I guess with the 92% being gun-free zones, there's a chance when they answer this question it'll be 0. But I'm wondering if anybody that has gone through your course has actually been in a situation, or it's just the fact that there are people in the school that are armed deters people from doing anything bad there. So has anybody actually had to use the training?
Yeah, so not in Colorado that I know of. I'll tell you about a situation in Ohio. Got a principal that went through this same training in Ohio. So there could be some deterrent. Bennett School District, and this has been very public in the paper, has this huge sign in their parking lot. They're very remote. that says we have armed staff. They think that that's a deterrent. Other schools say we're not doing anything like that. That's fine. Regardless of how a school decides to display that or not display it, we'll offer them the training. So some of it could be deterrent. You also have to think, even though something like Parkland, it seems so big to us, when you add up the number of schools nationally, it is a small amount. So just the fact that we haven't had anything here in Colorado, I don't think means anything. It's not that big a sample size. When I attended the class in Ohio, and it's the same curriculum that I brought here, they had a teacher or a principal back for his second year. He'd gone through FASTER, was on duty at school for a year, and then came back for his refresher training, and that's the class I attended. He tells the story you could have heard a pin drop in the room when he told it, because everybody's training for this, right? They want to know what they would do. He was a middle school principal. The older sibling of one of his kids came to campus. Their dad had died a few days prior. He was there to pick up his little brother, which he can't do. So principal goes out, and there's a ruckus in the parking lot. Principal goes out to the parking lot to see what's going on. The older kid, the 18-year-old, is standing next to his van, the windows open. The principal says, "What's going on? You can't pick up your brother," this whole discussion. 18-year-old reaches into the open window of his van and grabs a shotgun. Principal takes out his concealed firearm and does what he's supposed to with it, aims it at the threat. The kid, seeing that, his legs turn to noodles, drops the shotgun in the van. It never comes out of the van, and he's on the ground. Principal gets him on the ground. They get law enforcement involved, all that stuff. No shot was fired. No media was ever notified, because the mom said, "Our family's going through a lot. Please don't let the media know." And of course, the principal is fine with that. They dealt with it with law enforcement and got the 18-year-old the help that he needed. So how many of those things happen that we'd never see? I don't know. It's one I personally heard about, where a shot was never fired. But what was the 18-year-old going to do with it? I don't know. He could have been doing nothing with it. He could have been bird hunting and didn't mean anything with it. Or he could have been a very disturbed kid who brought it in and shot people while he got to his brother. We don't know. What we do know is that it stopped right there. So I know that was a very long answer to your question, and I hope somebody has a question for Evan. But
no, it's good.
I'm sure there's more out there than we know.
Yes, sir.
So you've kind of hinted at this a little bit, but I'm curious about the training. You've got an armed staff member. Currently in the schools, like in St. Vrain, shelter in place, close the door, hide, that sort of thing. Are you training these teachers to defend the position as they're sheltering in place, or are the teachers actually going out looking for the threat to confront and stop it?
Yeah, and all of that depends, and we talk a ton about that. So it depends on how many armed defenders there are. It depends where you are when it happens. Do you have kindergartners or seniors?
I've got high school.
Yeah, so but we talk about that because it would be different for somebody with kindergartners versus high school seniors who might reliably stay where you tell them to stay, as opposed to little 5-year-olds. Might being the operative word, right?
You're funny.
Thank you. Oh my gosh, somebody finally calls me funny. Awesome. As I mentioned, 60% of these folks are not tied to a classroom, which is a lot of a tactical advantage. We talk a lot about this in class, and lots of people say, well, if it's this, if it's that, because they've got their own particular situation. But think about it at a very high level this way. If you are the one armed defender, let's say there were multiples of you, and somebody was out sick, and somebody was whatever, and you're the only one left, and you have a classroom, and somebody is executing children somewhere else. Now you have competing priorities. You have children to protect right here, because think about it, you don't know, you hear shots, you don't know if there's one or two people, right? So person two might come for your kids. But you know that something's happening somewhere, and your job is to save life. If people are being executed, figure that out. So that might mean kids go into Mrs. Smith's room next door. Mrs. Carno's going this way to keep you kids safe. But they have to deal with those competing priorities. So it's not an either or. It all depends on everything in the situation. We have one school that came through class. They're a rural school, K through 12 in one building. They have 7 armed defenders in that school. That's a very different situation than a bigger school with a couple of people that are dispersed.
And I don't have a question for Evan, but I do just want to say thank you for sharing with us.
Thank you.
I could tell that was a hard thing for you to share. It's hard for me to hear it, but thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
I have a question for Evan. So, going back to your experience, first off, have you done faster training 3-day sessions?
I'm actually in the next class, which is coming up. So I'll be going through the full 3-day classes.
So at least you're a little bit familiar about what's being taught.
Yep. And I've been to the last 2 training sessions, not as a participant, but came and just observed, talked with teachers, thanked them for what they were doing. But I did want to go through the 3-day full training, and I'll be doing the upcoming event. So
here's the question I'm getting to.
Mm-hmm.
Forget firearms.
Mm-hmm.
Forget, just have the people armed who were armed back then, and those who were not, were not. If the medical training available in that 3-day course
mm-hmm.
were available, not necessarily to you, I get that you were pretty badly chewed up, but was available to just 1 or 2 other people in the building.
Yeah.
Could that science teacher, Mr. Sanders, was it?
Yeah.
Could he still be alive today?
So there's a lot from Columbine to chew on with that. In the library, when I left, I had stood up. I looked out over the desk. I saw smoke, bodies, blood pools around them, and I whispered, "Is anyone alive? I called out, and I was whispering because I thought it was dead silent in there. Later, I learned from the investigators at that moment the fire alarms were going off. There were kids screaming and crying, people calling out still, but my hearing had shut down from the traumatic event. That's how my body reacted. My hearing shut down, everything else functioned. I could see, I could move, I had so much adrenaline, the shot in my back didn't even affect me. But I thought everyone was dead until I had gotten into another room. That's when people started making their way out. I remember what that looked like when I stood up and looked out. It surprised me when investigators came back later and they showed me the pictures that they had taken for the investigation. The pools of blood were, it's out there now. You can go see these. They're huge. They're massive, which shows that there were several students in the library who literally their heart was still pumping blood, and it was pumping the blood out. And I think that if they had gotten medical attention, I don't think as many people would have died in the library if they would have stopped. Second, Dave Sanders. He was shot twice with the 12-gauge shotgun slug in the back. As he was falling, students in a classroom saw him out in the hallway, went out, grabbed him, pulled him in, and kept him alive for, I think, close to 3 hours. He was left behind when they were clearing the building. SWAT was doing clearing the building. They were calling the paramedics in, but he was kept alive because of an Eagle Scout who had medical training. He died in the transfer from one care to the other. So I think had there been tourniquets, other things that could have helped in the vicinity, I think they could have. They used T-shirts to stop the bleeding. They kept him conscious, you know. And like I said, the protocols were different. They didn't get to him in time either. He would have been alive with the new protocols. So, yeah, the medical training involved in this class and medical training will save lives. It's another fact at Columbine was every single student who was shot that made it to the hospital survived. That, I mean, it's a testament to society, our doctors, our whole healthcare system, but they saved every single kid that was shot. I actually, when I got out of the building, I ran behind a shed that we kept all our football equipment and other stuff in. When I ran behind them, there was a student who was shot. He'd been shot multiple times. I'm an Eagle Scout as well, and I had some preliminary first aid training, and I did what I could do to keep him conscious, to stop the bleeding. Pulled him out he was in the shade. I pulled him out into the sun to try and keep him warm. And we ended up loading him into a Lakewood police officer's patrol car who had driven up to the school, drove him to a cul-de-sac where we transferred him to paramedics who took him to the hospital. And he ended up, I don't even know, it was a ridiculous, like 70% of his blood he lost, and he still survived. So the medical training absolutely saves lives, and that's another fact of this training that Laura can probably add to, but I think that alone should be in every school, not just for school shootings, but for all kinds of events that can save lives.
Yeah, if you have a wood shop in your school, do you have a tourniquet? Is what I want to know. Yeah, so and I'm glad you asked that question. We have schools that have armed staff that there are other people in the school that say, I want to help, but I am never going to be an armed person ever. And we bring medical-only training to those folks, and hugely valuable if, God forbid, something happens. The other thing I forgot to mention is part of the tuition is every student goes back, student meaning people who come through the training, goes back with a trauma kit using all of the materials that we trained. So tourniquet, chest seal, compression bandages, hemostatic gauze, all that kind of stuff that they just learned to do something with. So if a school has 5 defenders, you now have 5 trauma kits that you can put in places that will be helpful if something happens.
Yes, ma'am.
I'm a retired administrator in school, and I have a couple questions. And one, you were talking that there is a law in Colorado and has been for 15 years that allows this done in schools. So your efforts are really not designed to create, a force of people who will create new legislation. You're out there to train people. Am I hearing you correctly?
Yeah, and the question is, we're not out there trying to create a new force of people because the law is already there, and that's accurate. When I came back from Ohio and figured out that the law was the way it was, I didn't even know that as much as I pay attention, and all of these people are carrying, and they're getting they were getting training before I was here. And probably some pretty good training. But we wanted to put something together that was better than pretty good. And given the curriculum, given our the level of competence of our instructors, the fact that they're active duty, they learned something last night at work. It just brings it up a number of notches. So
my second question has to do being a retired educator. I had questions because you said there have been 10,000 people armed across in classrooms or in schools. Has there been over all this time any statistics that have been gathered? Because I know someone asked about Colorado. Has it ever been used?
Right.
Have they ever used? Are there statistics being amassed in terms of what's going on with these armed people?
yeah, and statistics regarding all these armed people everywhere. And let me just address the 10,000 really quick. It's an estimate that people talk about. So I don't know that that's exactly. It could be a lot more, and we wouldn't know it. I mean, Texas alone, they have a very decentralized process for allowing armed staff. Some of them get training from organizations like ours, some get training from their sheriff's offices. It's very decentralized, but 10,000 is a number that folks talk about. And in all of that time that people have been keeping an eye on this, we don't have the big thing was going to happen and the armed staff member, not a school resource officer, but the armed staff member stopped them. We don't have that, but again, there's lots of things that might not have looked like that, like the kid with the shotgun in the van. So it's really hard to say. I mean, I'm convinced that good things have happened, and we haven't heard of bad things happening. So that's a net positive in my world. And when we look at that, sort of that stopwatch of death, that every 17 seconds one person gets shot on average in these incidents, and the cops aren't going to be there in 17 seconds. So, but to answer your question, there's just not it's not a way to track that because it's such a decentralized process nationally.
Jason?
Sure. Well, I tried asking you this earlier when we were setting
And I ran away.
Yep. Yeah. So, so my question was pertaining to, so my wife works in a school district around here, and she is absolutely someone that would, put herself in between a shooter or anybody trying to harm the children that she's in charge of taking care of. And the school district she works for is probably not, they're pretty naive about this kind of stuff, and they're not very likely to, engage in training, with Faster. Is Faster something that she could maybe get into as an individual, as someone who works at a school every day?
Yeah, so the question is that his wife's in a school district that is probably not going to pass a policy like this. Can she go through as just an ordinary citizen? So let me address the what happens in school districts like that. So if you are in a school district and you would like them to talk about this policy, not necessarily adopt it, but talk about it. Parents, grandparents, go to your school board meetings. These are the most local of your elected officials. They're right in your neighborhood. Go talk to them and say, find out what's going on security-wise at the school. That these are your kids or your grandkids. You want them returned alive every single day, right? So, so talk to your school boards and figure out what's going on, and cause them to have that conversation. It might not end up the way you want, but the conversation needs to be had. So I would first say that. Then to the question, if somebody wants to come through our training that isn't part of an armed staff program. Since we are raising private money, if somebody wants to come through who's an ordinary person not in a school, I'm happy to have them come through. We would not have a scholarship available for them. I've also in a couple of school districts had folks come through to be an ambassador back to that school district, where a school district is saying, well, I kind of see your point, but I don't know. I wonder what the training would be like. And so they maybe have somebody who moonlights as a firearms instructor or is on their church's armed security team, somebody who's already kind of in that role, come through the class so they can go back to these are usually bigger districts, go back to their district security chief and say, this is what I learned in the 3 days, just so that they know. So I've done a little bit of that as well.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I apologize for being so late. I didn't hear your basic presentation. I assume some of this has been covered, but just 3 or 4 bullet points, and if you could pick out one of them. One, the SWAT team out of Columbine, why did they not come in the building or allow anyone when Mr. Sanders was bleeding to death? Is that cowardice? Is it policy? Is it, I mean, the killers were already dead, had been dead for like 3 hours. It's like, wasn't there any way to check? So that's one point. One, there was a teacher, I think in Illinois, 5 or 6 years ago, a student came and shot a couple of people, and she talked him out of the gun, got the gun away from him without physical violence, just talked him out of it. And then I remember one case, Empire State Building, about 8 or 10 years ago, a guy came in and shot his spouse. Several policemen came. They shot 9 civilians just coming in and shooting. This is trained policemen who didn't know where to aim or anything like that. So, and the fourth point being, rather than all about guns versus guns, and of course, if they aren't having assault weapons with high-powered big magazines and high-powered bullets, there wouldn't be so many dead. But what about the mental health resource training, where all through our country we're reducing mental health, everything like that, and more hype about racism and about guns. So if you could take any one of those, I'd appreciate it.
I'll take the
Yeah. So at Columbine with the SWAT, it wasn't cowardice. A lot of what was happening at Columbine at the time was protocol. They were going through. They started at one end of the building. They waited for the whole team to arrive. That was the protocol at the time. That's how they operated from coast to coast on SWAT teams. They all grouped together. They entered the building and they cleared it room by room. They couldn't get the paramedics in to Dave Sanders fast enough because of the paramedic safety. They had to clear the building 100% before they could bring in paramedics, unarmed people, to do that. That was a learning lesson for the Jeffco Sheriff's Department and every single department across the country. I would be surprised if you saw that anywhere. It's been changed for nearly 20 years or 19. So that's been taken care of, and that's the protocols for that are completely different. So to use that as it is a non-factor nowadays. It won't happen. And then
When you address, I know one thing that I remember learning when I saw your presentation before was that there's a whole psychological part of this. Do you guys address talking down shooters? Is that anything that you do in your training? Like this gentleman was mentioning?
Sure. So not every situation is a shoot situation. And that's outside of the school, inside of the school. There's a whole lot, almost everything that happens does not involve an armed staff member or a school resource officer drawing his or her firearm. Let's make sure that we're clear on that. But we do talk a lot about de-escalation. And you've got, what was that back there, camera guy?
He was saying thank you.
Oh, I thought I was supposed to speak into Evan. See, and then I lost my complete train of thought.
Right.
But yeah, we talk a lot about de-escalation. A student might think about some high school students who are big. They might attempt to get physical with a teacher. This has nothing to do with firearms. They might attempt to get physical with a teacher. How does the teacher deal with that? There are de-escalation procedures. And to the question of a teacher talking a child out of harming anymore, that's great. That's part of de-escalation. But there comes a point when the defender's life is in jeopardy, and we go through the whole lethal force in the law so they understand that whole thing, what is really legally okay, and it's just a very tiny segment of those sorts of things. Almost everything can be dealt with non-lethally, and we do talk a lot about that.
And just real quick to add to that, at Columbine, when I spoke to them and they left the library, I was the last person to speak to the two murderers before they committed suicide. When they left the library, and when they lowered their guns, I saw their facial expressions change. Something happened in that moment, and I think that's a whole nother discussion, but something happened in that moment. They walked around the school, they tried to blow up their bombs, they walked by classrooms, looked in the windows and saw classrooms with kids in it and walked by. They didn't shoot at or kill another student after that moment. Something changed in that moment, and when you look at other situations, point blank, the people who come to murder innocent people, they're cowards. And a lot of times when they're confronted, they stop, whether it's with someone talking them down or someone physically stopping them with force. they stop. And that's one of the main things that with the training, it doesn't only the de-escalation, all that, it's all involved, but sometimes you have to have that ability to stop them one way or another. So.
In the story I told about the Ohio principal and the 18-year-old with the shotgun, what he said was, I credit Faster for me not firing a shot, because we talk about that. And he said he was a man of faith, and he said, I don't know how I would have lived with myself if I had been forced to shoot a child. And that's reality. I had a reporter once say, or ask me the question, do these teachers, armed school staff, do they know that they're going to have to live with that for the rest of their life if they have to kill somebody? And I said, look, nobody's getting out of this unscathed. If there is a school shooting like a Parkland situation, you're going to live with that the rest of your life anyway. You're going to live with it if you were able to stop it. You're going to live with it if you weren't able to stop it. You're going to live with it like we see Evan 19 years later, still affected by this. There's stuff you're going to have to live with. The goal is stopping the killer. That's it.
Okay, any more questions? I guess
so. For Evan, is there something that is a misconception about Columbine that you hear over and over again? Does kind of go like that?
Well, yeah, not to the Faster side, but well, I don't know if I want to go down that rabbit hole, but bullying. You hear that all the time, that bullying caused Columbine, and it's an accepted, easy argument, and I don't accept it. These two were bullies before Columbine. They were the biggest bullies when they came into our school with guns and murdered my classmates, my friends. And accepting, and this is part of the prevention side of things that I talk about too. Accepting the fact that bullying causes these things is lazy, and it's a failure in society, I think. Bullying is not second, or murder is not second to bullying. There's no reason that someone has the right to go in and murder another student. And telling these kids, it's in their minds. That's how they think. Oh, I've been bullied, and you've seen it time and time again. And I think that's another factor of why these keeps happening. Is a lot of these kids feel justified, that they feel like they have the purpose to go do this, and it's wrong. And bullying is wrong. It's another fact, but it doesn't cause school shootings. The fact that they are suicidal and homicidal, there's a whole other factor. Eric and Dylan worshipped death and destruction. They loved Hitler. They looked up movies that were violent. They fed on video games. I think those weren't necessarily the products that were going into them that changed who they were. I think they were drawn to it because of the thoughts that they had previously put into their minds. So that is a huge misconception. But the fact is, I mean, on the school safety side, the kids that are attracted to these elements start broadcasting their death and destruction, their love for it, and that's a way we can prevent it from before any of this even happens. So, and I can go on with that, but like I said, that's a rabbit hole. I didn't want to go too far. So,
I've got two questions. One for Evan. You mentioned you're going through the next training. Are you doing that because you're an educator, or do you have some other motivation?
I'm going through it mainly so that I can speak more to the program of what these teachers will actually be encountered, so I can also advocate to other teachers and the fact that these things happen, and I like to be trained and prepared for what happened, and a byproduct of what I went through at Columbine has steered me in that way. That's why I've gone through these other trainings and other classes and other ways to prevent and stop horrible things from happening.
Also for Laura, can you tell us what your level of dialogue is with the school districts just in Boulder County?
So I don't out my school districts.
Are you talking to 1, 2, 5, 10?
Not all of them and not most of them. Yeah, and so when you say talking to, I might do something as simple as answering a phone call where somebody has a question about how a board might take action, all the way up into something like I did last night. It was very public, very media covered, so I'll say that it was Peyton. To talking to a community group with all of the school board there. So it runs the gamut, and I'm probably, I'd mentioned I'm talking to probably 12 districts that are somewhere in process on this, but above that I get a lot of questions. So.
Conversations with school board members? Or
Generally speaking, it might be a school board member, it might be a parent, it might be an administrator.
And I just want to add, this is a side note kind of off of that, is I also advocate for every single community to protect the children and their schools in the way that they see fit. Those are their communities, their children, it's their teachers, it's their lives. And I think that that should be a community event where they decide on how they want to protect their children. And that's why I think if you stand on one side or the other of this issue, you need to go talk to your school board and have this dialogue, because the fact is what we are doing right now is not working, and we need to do a better job at protecting the schools in this moment now.
We have one more question in the back.
I'm assuming by concealed, you're talking the teacher would be carrying the gun at all times, correct?
Correct. Yeah, when we, our program advocates concealed carry on their person all the time. There's a couple of reasons for that. Number one, it is never safer than when it is on your person. If it's in a purse, if it's in anywhere else, somebody can get to it. Some folks ask us about, well, what about a firearm locked up somewhere? And there's a district in Ohio that went through the faster training there that opted to do that against the guidance of the instructors. The reason that's more challenging is you never know when the thing is going to happen. And if my lockbox is right here on the wall and I can guarantee that the bad guy's coming through that door and I can get to it quickly, awesome. But I go to the restroom sometimes. I'm in the carpool line sometimes. I have cafeteria duty. So having it on the person of the defender, and we talk a lot about what does deep concealment mean, what kind of holsters are best for given situations. A gentleman might not mind looking extra boxy, but most women do everything they can not to look extra boxy. So there's lots of different techniques, and we spend time talking about that as well.
And did you say you're a teacher?
I am not.
Okay, Okay, so I want to thank you too for sharing your story. I work with one of my colleagues was one of your classmates, so I've had many of his conversations with him too, and he is a teacher. I just try to picture myself in a classroom teaching kids, and all of a sudden I'm in a closet. And yeah, I have a gun, but I can't hear anything, I can't see anything, I don't know what's going on, and I'm comfortable with a gun. I grew up with guns. I know how to use them, I know how to shoot. I think about if Dylan was my student, or, Jonesboro, Columbine, Claire Davis. The shooters in all those cases were students. And it's easy to sit here and say, well, yeah, a bad guy with the gun and evil executing our students, until one of those people is one of your students too. And so I go through these scenarios in my mind all the time. I'm curious, was there a teacher in the library with you? Was it one teacher? Had that teacher had a gun, maybe you would have been okay. Had they not, maybe not. Maybe Mr. Sanders would have been armed, he might not have found you. I mean, there's a lot of things that go on in very stressful situations that you really can't train for.
No, absolutely. So the librarians that were there that day had left the library to investigate what was happening, and at the same time, a teacher, actually the famous 911 call that you probably have heard on news reports and things like that, was a teacher who was shot and wounded that was on outside duty, had run into the library to call 911, and she was hit in the shoulder. She had climbed under the librarian's desk. There was like three footholds, and she was a couple down from me that I didn't even know that's where she was during everything. Had she been armed, yeah, it could have been a different situation. And you're right as far as you never know what you're going to do. At Columbine, we had an SRO who engaged before they even went into the school with the two. And he stayed outside per protocol, like I talked about earlier. Things have changed. And then you look at Parkland, the SRO who failed to go in, which is another reason why I support having more than one armed defender in the school. Redundancy, it helps with the fact that people are going to fail. Officers, they're human. They will fail. They will not always react. They sign up every day to do a noble job, just like teachers do, but they're not perfect. They're not, they will fail. And we've seen that in instances where they have failed at different places, at school shootings and others. And that's why with more than one person who has been trained, armed, and in that mindset, when one fails, another one may rise up. And I like those odds a lot better than not. Well, and I will tell you this, I cannot, I saw them, I looked at them, I watched and heard them murder classmates. I know that in that fact, when you see that evil going on, I think a lot of those things go out the window. You get to the point, it's like a rabid dog that's attacking your own child. You're not going to think, I might get bit if I step in. You're going to do what you can to jump in to stop whatever evil act or horrific act is going on. And the way, Dave Sanders was unarmed, defending children, putting his life at risk even though he was defenseless. Parkland, he literally used his body to stop bullets. Same thing at Newtown. A teacher covered kindergarten students and took bullets for them. These teachers are prepared to stop and protect their children, but they don't have to die. They can live and protect their kids. And that's the main point.
Yeah, and I'll just say in a closing comment, it's not for everyone. We've had not many, and this is me plus Ohio, it's a little bigger pool of folks. We've had a few folks who, after the first half a day, which is the mindset training, say, I just can't do this. And that's okay. They thought they could, and if they can't, that's okay. It is not for everybody. But where we go with that is the love you have, because you love your kids. You call them my kids, right? The love you have for your kids causes you to stop that monster who is killing them. And that's the mindset that these folks, I don't know if it's something you're born with, something, whatever, but that's the mindset. Stop killing these innocent children. That person who came in, even if I was just tutoring him yesterday and I liked him yesterday, if he is harming my children, he has to be stopped.
I just have one last question for you. We do have to close because the library is going to take us out of this room eventually. But my last question for you, and I think this is really important for people to know, is what is the protocol with the schools as far as who knows who is armed? So say, I live in a tiny little school district of 3,500 students in my district at my daughter's school, which right down the street from me. If I walk in that school, which I do almost every single day when my kids are in school, and I've thought about this since I learned all this back in April. I've walked into that school and this has crossed my mind. Almost whenever I go in there, how do we know who this is, or do we know, or if it's the secretary, does the teacher down the hall know?
Yeah.
Who knows who's who?
So I can tell you again, my experience based on the folks that I talk to, I'll tell you what most people are doing. Some schools, the public they don't issue a press release, none of that stuff. Schools, I talked like Bennett has a big sign. The school board the school district I was at last night, they issued press releases about this meeting. So they're, on that end, the public knows that this discussion is going on versus the public doesn't know the discussion is going on. And the law doesn't mandate they do that. Most schools, the public has some idea. Whether the public has some idea or not, usually the armed staff team knows who the armed staff team is. Because you know what? They train together, which is a really good thing. We love for them to come through class together. If the principal, superintendent aren't one of the armed defenders, they would also know because it's their school. If you are a parent and you want to know if this is going on in your school, go ask your super, go ask your principal, is this going on? And they'll have an answer for you. Everybody has a different way of approaching it. Almost no schools, even if they are public about being having armed defenders, almost no school says, and it's these 5 people, just for the safety of those individuals. Now, there's one school that did, a teacher did a CBS Evening News interview last year. And I talked to him. He came back this year for his second year of training. And I said, so what led you to that decision to talk to national news about that, where everybody else says, I don't want to make myself a target? He said, and this is, schools can do whatever they want. He said, here's how I look at it. If a bad guy's going to come into the school, I want him to find me first before he finds the kids. And I went, okay, that's a decent answer, I guess. So.
Okay, we do have 2 more questions. As long as they're really quick, we can take them. So, all right, go ahead, Jason.
My question's for Evan. So as a survivor of one of these events, and kind of, because I was in high school too when Columbine happened, I'd watched these things. Do you feel that this is almost turning into like a contest where each shooter wants to try to outdo the one before? Because it seems like they're each trying to escalate on top of the other one, trying to get that extra little bit of fame. Because we know the kid that shot up Parkland, he has gotten more fan mail than any other mass shooter in the history of ever. And it's because of all the attention that he's gotten because of it. And each one gets more and more attention. Do you think that the attention that we're feeding these people is contributing to these events?
I do. I think the notoriety, even Eric and Dylan, well, and there I go. I try to not use their name, and because it does it. But everyone after that has looked to Columbine, and they look to the ones before it, and they do. And I think the fact that we haven't nipped this in the butt is that has promoted it, and that breeds more of this in the future. That's why if we get armed staff and we get people who want to actually physically stop these, it's a deterrent, because they're not going to get famous. They're going to get either incarcerated or dead, and that's the message that they need to get. And that it's not okay to kill and murder innocent people. That's the message.
I agree completely. I mean, it almost seems like our money in the bank is better protected than the kids are at school.
Absolutely.
Okay, ma'am, just real
Yeah, it's just a quick question. Have you considered using tasers instead of guns? And if not, why not?
Yeah, so this question came up last night. The parent in Peyton School District who brought this to the school board's attention, he's actually a homicide detective with Colorado Springs PD. And so he has a lot of experience with a lot of non-lethal. And somebody asked that exact same question. It was good to hear directly from law enforcement on that question. But he said the only thing in some cases to stop somebody who is firing bullets your way is another firearm to stop them. Not necessarily kill them, stop them. His concern with tasers, depending on the person, depending on their body makeup, depending on what they might have on board from a drug standpoint, is you can zap them and they're up again, zap them and they're up again. And if that person has a firearm and you, the innocent person, the defender, or any other innocent people are still at risk, a firearm is the best tool to stop the person from doing what they are doing, harming or killing people.
Okay, so, all right, Kelly lives here in Longmont, so they have a question.
Is a concealed carry permit a prerequisite for this?
Yeah, so the question is a concealed carry permit a prerequisite? Yes. You can't carry in a school without a concealed carry permit. if any of you have been through concealed carry training, it is very minimal. So if somebody only had that training, we actually send them to more training before they come to FASTER, because we want them to be hitting the ground running on these very advanced skills. But as I said before, who's raising their hand and signing up, volunteering for this role? It's people with a significant level of firearms experience because they're just more comfortable with it.
I also partake in a huge part of vice president of our PAC and the teachers very well, so it will help me get the word out by.
Sure. Yeah, and if I can, if I or Evan can help come talk to schools from an education standpoint, we've talked to school boards in executive session so that they could ask the questions they really want to ask without concern for how they come out. We've done that too, so we're happy to help. And we have a stack of cards here if anybody would like one.
So Laura, if you have you have the CRS, the Colorado Revised Statute. So she has some handouts if people want them, the actual Colorado Revised Statute, and more information about FASTER. And then we do have a little clipboard here if you're interested in just kind of getting connected. If you want to help bring this to your school district, you can put your name and email on there. And we'll kind of help you as we start to have different things happening, we'll let you know. So, but otherwise, we just want to thank Evan and Laura for coming up here today and this great presentation.
Thank you. Good job.